Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about what are known as constants. Particularly in this lecture, we're going to be going over the difference between constants and variables. We're going to talk about how to name a constant, talk about constant identifiers. We're going to talk about the different ways that you can declare constants within your PHP code. And then we're going to go over some coding conventions that we're going to use for this course when it comes to constants. We're also going to talk about the server or underscore server superglobal variable, which is a superglobal variable like the underscore get variable that we've used to process form data. And we're including that description in this lecture because it's something that's often used when defining constants in web application configuration files. So, basically what is a constant? Well, as the name implies, it's a value that doesn't change. In PHP specifically, it's an identifier that you can assign a value to. However, unlike a variable, once it's been assigned a value, that value can't change during the execution of the script. And this is something that's actually enforced by the PHP interpreter. So if you define or declare a constant and set it equal to one value and try to do it again later in your script, you're going to get a warning, and then also the redefinition is not going to work. One other difference between constants and variables is that variables can be used to hold any PHP data type. Arrays, the scalar data types, a special data type like null. However, constants can only be assigned scalar data types, which is, as we know, is integer, float, string, and Boolean. So it can only be one of those four data types. Additionally, just to mention, as mentioned, constants are often used in what you'd call config files for defining data values that you use or constant values that you use in many places throughout your web application. I say things that never change because basically they change, but they're not going to change during the execution of your web application. Examples might be the sales tax rate, which isn't going to change very often, and maybe you'll have an email form on your website, and you always want it to email to a default administrator's email address. That's something that you could define as a constant. Now, the way constant identifiers work is similar to variable identifiers. The one big difference is that they don't begin with a $sign. Other than that, all of the same rules apply. They have to start with an underscore or letter, and then after that, they can be any combination of letters, underscores, and numbers. So here's a couple examples of four different constants that we've declared. And for example, we've declared a different constant for each of the different scalar data types, which are the only types, again, that you can use to assign to a constant identifier. So we created one: days in the week equals 7, set the sales tax rate to 10%. We have a string that we set to a server name, Educator.com, and then we might have a Boolean constant in our configuration file that says, are we going to require a password? And in this case, we set it to true. One thing to note in particular is that unlike variables and variable identifiers, you can't use a constant within a double-quoted string. So variables, you can make use of variable interpolation, but that does not work for constants. If you put a constant name within a string, it's just simply going to output the name of the constant. So we know what constants are and how their identifiers, or the rules for their identifiers in PHP. Now let's talk about how we actually declare constants within our code. PHP basically provides two different methods. The first method is through the use of a function called the define function, and the second is using an assignment statement with the const keyword. And this section right here, or this bullet right here, shows the two different syntaxes sort of in action. Here we're defining, using the define function to define a constant called pi, and we're setting it equal to the float value 3.14. Now if we wanted to do the same thing using the a const assignment method, basically we have the variable name with the assignment followed by the assignment operator and the value we're assigning to it, and then we proceed all this with the const keyword. And that basically says that we're declaring a constant pi, setting it equal to 3.14. This value cannot be changed. One major difference between the two forms is that with the define function, a constant can be defined as the output of an expression. So for example, we could define a constant home, and let's say we know that the protocol is always going to be HTTP, but we're going to use a variable to set the server name of this home page, and that could be a variable. So using the define function, we can actually use an expression in the value portion of the function. And I should mention actually that the first argument to the define function is the name of the constant that you want enclosed in or enclosed in quotes, and then the value that you want to assign to the constant is the second argument. In this case, we're assigning it a value that's a string that's basically the concatenation of this string literal HTTP : / and the value of the variable server name. Now, you can't do this with the const assignment version. If we tried to do it down here in the same way, it would generate a parse error because using the const assignment method, basically you can only assign static values. So we would actually have to hard code it as like HTTP . So that makes the define function in ways a lot more useful, and it's mostly what we're going to be using in this course. So let's take a look at a file called constants.php. Well, before we do that, let's take a look at the actual code that describes or shows you how this defining constants works in real PHP code. So here we have a define statement that defines as before, the function, the constant pi, giving it the name pi in capital letters, and we're assigning it the value 3.14. And then here we have an echo statement that echoes the pi value. And remember, as mentioned, you can't include constants within double quoted strings. So in order to output it with as part of another string, we use the concatenation operator. And then here we have a constant definition or a constant declaration that uses the const assignment method. So we're declaring the variable pi, and in this case we're making it a little more precise, and we're setting it to the value 3.14159 as opposed to just 3.14, and then echoing it. However, as we know, constants cannot be redefined, so when you actually try to run this page right here, when you try to make this second declaration, you're going to get an error generated. Additionally, the constant pi is not going to get updated, so when we echo pi down here, it's not going to echo the second value that we tried to set it to, but the first one. So if we actually go and look at this page, constants.php, we can see it output 3.14 twice because pi wasn't reassigned, and we also get a notice stating that we had already defined pi within the file. So let me go ahead and now, one thing that we could do was, if we wanted to make this legal and output a different value for pi, we could create a constant with a different name called pi2, which would eliminate the error with redefining a constant, and then we should be able to echo the second value. And if we go through and do this, we don't get the error, and we see that we have the output value of pi2. But that kind of defeats the purpose of what we're doing. I was just doing that to show you how you could change that so that the error doesn't occur. But typically you're not going to be doing this. So down here in this other section that I had commented out, I'm going to talk about how you can use expressions within the define function, as we mentioned. So for example, I'm defining a variable called server, and we're setting it to the value www.educator.com. And then I'm going to define a constant called home_HTTP, which is going to be an HTTP link to that server. And as the value of home HTTP, I'm going to assign it the value of this expression, which is the concatenation of the HTTP : / string literal and the value of the server variable. And then out here, or in this next line, I'm just going to output that variable. Now, if we try to do that same thing down here in a const assignment statement, we're going to get an error because, as we had mentioned on the slide, constant assignment statements using this method can only have static values. They can't be expressions, which in this case would be the concatenation of the server variable with FTP. So, for example, if we wanted to create a different constant, home FTP, we couldn't use this type of definition. We'd actually have to replace it. So if we go ahead and we view this page again now with the section uncommented, we can see that we get a parse error, unexpected dot, which is a concatenation operator on line 43. If we go back and look at line 43, we see this is the section of code we thought would cause an error because this is not legal syntax. So the way we could replace that would be to just hard code the link in. And again, this is something you probably wouldn't do you'd usually use a define function because it gives you this additional flexibility. But to demonstrate this and to show both of these links or these constants output, we can make that change, and we won't get the error, and it should output all of the information. So here's the 2 pi values from before, and then we can see the values of the 2 different constants, home underscore HTTP and home underscore FTP. So now I just want to talk about some coding conventions that we're going to use in this course for constants. As you probably noticed, all of our constants were declared using uppercase letters, and spaces between words were replaced with underscores. And this is the convention we're going to be using, and it's pretty much the convention that all PHP developers use. And basically, it signifies that anytime you see a identifier that's in all capital letters, you know that it's a constant. So it's what we're going to use in this course, and it's what's used out there in the real world. Additionally, there's those 2 methods we mentioned for defining constants. We're pretty much going to use only the define function for defining our constants as opposed to the const assignment statement. The reason for that is it gives us the added flexibility of using expressions to set the value of the constant. And as before, as we talked about in the coding conventions for variables, your constant names or constant identifiers should be given meaningful names so that they describe kind of what their purpose is. Instead of calling something just link, you might call it home underscore page, which tells you that the link is to your home page. So now I want to talk about the server, or the underscore server superglobal. And basically, to mention again, we haven't talked too much about superglobals, and we're going to get to that later in the course. But a superglobal is a variable that's predefined by PHP, and it's made available to you everywhere in your script, and it's automatically populated by PHP. The one we've used, superglobal we've used before, is the underscore get superglobal, which is used to access basically, as we know, get data that's input to a form. The underscore server superglobal provides information about the current web server configuration, and also provides a lot of information like the web server's document root and any HTTP header information for the currently running script. One of the common, and its associative array like get, and one of the more common keys that we're going to use to access this array is document root. And that basically provides the full path in the local file system to the web server's document root. And this is useful because in configuration files we can use it. We can use that value to basically define where include directories are, so that when we include files, we can specify, we can create an include directory constant, and it will make use of this. And then that way, when we include a file, it'll know which directory to look in. So let's take a look at a file called serversuperglobal.php. And basically, the beginning of this file, what it does is it just creates what it does is it outputs the PHP info. What that's going to do is that actually shows all of the information in the server underscore server superglobal, so we can see what it looks like. And then I've also just added an anchor and a link at the bottom, or a link to the bottom, so that we can quickly get to the underscore server information, because on PHP info it's listed at the bottom. So if we go and we view this page, we can see PHP info generated. Click scroll to bottom, and at the bottom down here you can see it has information about the underscore server variable. Provides all sorts of different information. There's information from the HTTP headers about the user agent, all sorts of information. It gives information about the page that was used to refer you to this script page. And in particular, what we're looking for is the server document root. And basically what that says is that is giving us the document root of the web server that's serving this page. And in this case, it's users educator1 xampp hdocs, which is, as we expect, we learned in our section on or course on lesson on setting up our development environment that the htdocs directory in the xampp folder in our user directory is basically the document root for the default xampp configuration. So now if we go back to this page in the code editor and we come on a section we have below, you can see that what I've done is defined a constant called include dir, which is to represent the include directory, and basically we set the value equal to the server document root value, which as we know is the htdocs directory. And then what I've done is concatenated to that a string that basically directs you to the path of the include directory for example, lecture 19. If we had include files in lecture 19, we'd put them in an includes directory. So anytime maybe you'd want to include a file, for example, we're in this lecture 19 web application, we want to include a file called header.html. We can use this constant, in the file header.html, and PHP will be able to use the constant that uses the server document root variable to resolve this link, and it'll know where to find header.html. So let me erase this. Oops. So now that we've defined this variable, I've gone ahead or defined this constant, I've gone ahead and echoed it, and if we reload the script, it should show up at the bottom of the page. And if we look down here at the very bottom of the page, we can see it says include dir, and then it lists the include directory, which is this part right here is the document root, which is from the underscore server document root variable or value, and then we've appended to it the path to our current include directory, and we could use that for example in a configuration file for a web application to prepend to all include files. So for today's homework challenge, I just want to get a little practice with defining constants. We're going to be have you use the define method, which is the define function, which is the method we're going to use most in this course. And basically, I want to get you to have some experience with also using expressions to set the value of a constant. So I'm going to have you define a constant called admin email using the define function, and set its value to a valid email address, and then output its value. And that'll give you practice defining a constant, and it'll also give you practice echoing out a constant, because you'll learn that you can't include it in double quotes as you can with variables. Then I'm going to have you just delete the constant altogether and create two new constants, one called user and one called domain name. And basically I'm going to have you define the user constant to be the value that was to the left of the @ sign in your admin email address, and the domain name constant be the value to the right of the @ sign in your domain address. Then I'm going to have you redefine the admin email constant, and I want you to use the user and domain name constants we just created together to create the same admin email address that was created here in step 1. And that's just going to, again, give you a little practice with learning how to use expressions. In this case, the expression is a concatenation operation when setting the value of a constant. And you should be able to output the admin email in this updated script, and it should be the same value as in step 1. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com. I look forward to seeing you next time.